for discussion. My name is Ruben Hekster, and my co-interviewer today will be Jordaan. Today we have a rather internationally oriented session. Our guest will be Carlos Moedas, who is European Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation. How innovative and scientific is Europe? And what is the European Union doing to promote science here? Next to Carlos Moedas will be sitting our State Secretary for Education, Culture and for Science, of course, Mr. Dekker. He is showing Mr. Moedas around today to see what the Dutch government does with EU funding here in the Netherlands. If you want to ask a question yourself, you can approach Dylan, who has the audience microphone, or you can Twitter along using #RFD. Now, let's not wait any longer, but first, please give a warm hand for Mr. Carlos Moedas and Dekker.
There you go. Up.
Yes, so gentlemen, for both of you, welcome at Room for Discussion. It's a great pleasure for us to have you here on the couch. To start with you, Mr. Moedas. You're originally from Portugal, and you work in Brussels as European Commissioner. What is the exact reason for your visit here to the Netherlands today?
First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. I love talking to students, and I actually was one of the first Erasmus students in my country, a country in the 1990s that a lot of people from my hometown will never dream to travel. I had this amazing luck of actually getting into the first round of the Erasmus program. And one of the things that was interesting at the time is that no one really wanted me to do the Erasmus program. The professors at the university were very conservative and say, why would you go abroad? I mean, you have such a good university here. And I insisted that I really wanted to do that because I felt that I wanted to travel, I wanted to know the world. And so I insisted a lot, and finally they let me go. And it was probably the major thing in my life. And so, you know, people always give you sometimes wrong advices because they give you advices for their own good and not for your own good. So I think that as students, you should keep that in mind, that really the advices sometimes are not the ones that will count on the things you'll do in your life, but just when you follow your passion, that's when you get to the right places. And so I went to France very young in 1993. Then I spent a couple of years in France. I worked in France. And by probably 1997, I was bored to be an engineer. I was a civil engineer, and I wanted to do something different. And so I went to the United States to do a business school and to do my MBA. Then I worked a long time in the private sector. I went in the financial sector, basically in banking, and then I went to different sectors, but I was never fulfilled. There was something that was missing, and so at some point I got involved in politics.
Yes, we read Mr. Moedas because, we were wondering how did you make the transition from actually first you were an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, and then you became a European Commissioner. So it's quite a big transition.
It was a big transition. I think it's something that really you should keep in mind that in life, I mean, you normally do a lot of things when you're young that are what people expect from you. You're kind of a mirror. I mean, like your parents want you to go to this university or to go to that university or to do as a professional what they used to do or to be in your comfort zone. Because normally your parents are very risk averse. They want to be sure that their children actually are in a comfort zone. And I think that my switch was when I felt that I wanted to do something that I was passionate about. And I was never passionate about anything before getting involved into politics. And so that job of actually getting into your own mind and abstracting from the world around you and really getting what do I love to do, what actually drives me in the morning, I think it's something that actually at some point in my life led me to take the risk because it's always difficult to change because when you change, you take the risk. And so I took the risk to go into the public service.
And Mr. Dekker, have you studied abroad in your yeah, education years?
I studied in Leiden and started my PhD, and then went for some time to Oxford University in England.
For the
And
Erasmus as well, or?
no, it wasn't on Erasmus, but I spent 6 months there doing my research. And like Carlos Moedas,
Yes.
I found that time highly inspiring, and not only because Oxford is a marvelous university and it's great to be amongst other very intelligent and ambitious students, but being abroad for a while, learning a language really well, reading other newspapers, getting to know new friends,
Yeah.
learning how to look to your own country from not from within, but from outside. It broadens your perspective so much, and that's why I find it so interesting also to act at the European level, because
Everybody should study abroad once in a lifetime.
yes, I think study. We really work hard on that together with Jet Bussemaker, ministers who's responsible for higher education. Internationalization is high on our agenda, but I also think that international collaboration within Europe. I mean, Europe consists of so many relatively small countries.
Yeah.
We can only make a fist to Asia and to the US if we really work together and invest in international relations and getting to know one another.
Because I know that Europe is indeed investing a lot in the Erasmus program, trying to stimulate this studying abroad. But I know as well that here at the university, for example, that many students see it as well as an opportunity to party abroad rather than to study abroad sometimes. Is it indeed the purpose as well of this Erasmus program to not only make students study abroad for the purpose of studying, but as well for the purpose of enjoying other cultures? How do you look at that? Is there something to be improved?
I think party is good. I think party is very good. I think that actually the experience of living abroad is much more than studying. And one of the things that you see today is that when you interview a student that spends 6 months, 7 months in some other school, in another university, in another country, he's much more mature. I mean, he's a different person. So it's not about what you learn, but it's about the change that actually you are part of by living outside of your comfort zone.
And can you name us a specific memory from your experience that led to this change, perhaps?
I remember I went to France and I didn't speak a word of French, which was, by the way, a bit crazy that I went to France without speaking a word of French. And I remember to get to the bank to open my bank account, and I couldn't understand what they were telling me. And it was really one of these life-changing moments where I felt that, look, I'm lost, right? And that gave me a huge strength actually to understand and to change myself and to fight back and to say, no, I'm going to able to do it. I'm going to study hard. I'm in 6 months, I'm going to be able to communicate. And you know, and suddenly you are 20-something and you feel in a country that you don't understand what people are actually talking to you, and actually changes you from the inside, because or you survive or you die, but you don't have a lot more choices. So that sense of survival is extremely important.
And indeed it worked out well, right? Because I remember that in your hearing you even talked in French to Mr. Ying. Am I right?
No, I got married to a French woman.
Okay, well,
it kind of worked well, but I still struggle.
prior to coming here to the University of Amsterdam, you visited our Royal Academy of Sciences, in Dutch known as the KNAW, de Koninklijke Nederlandse Academie voor Wetenschappen. Yeah, Mr. Dekker, what have you shown Mr. Moedas over there?
Well, we had a really interesting discussion about the topic of open science, and open science is a concept where we're trying to push science more towards a culture where knowledge is openly shared. And it sounds so simple, but if you look at the current situation, it just isn't the case. For instance, many of the articles, many of the work studies that are done here at the universities are sent to academic publishers, and you can only basically read them if you pay a lot of money. And probably when you work at the university or study at the university, that's not a problem because your university has made a subscription. So if you go to the library, you can easily access it. But as soon as you finish your studies, you can no longer find these articles without paying a lot of money for it. And I think that is really awkward because it's research, it's knowledge, funded with public money, and that same public then has to pay again to actually use it and to share it. And I think we have to flip the system and find ways to distribute knowledge more openly, share it more openly. That's not only a matter of principle. I think it helps science to become better, more transparency, brings better science. It helps innovation. If information and knowledge is more easily and freely shared, small and medium enterprises can, for instance, use it.
Yeah, I can
Teachers can use it. Entrepreneurs can use it. So there's really an argument why we should push forward with this whole idea of open science.
Yeah, I can imagine open science is very valuable. Yeah, especially for us here in the Netherlands. Mr. Moedas, have you ever considered yourself to be a researcher, actually, since your portfolio consists of research, science, and innovation?
If I consider myself a researcher?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I was an engineer, but I was not a very good engineer, to be frank. And at some point, I changed to the world of finance. But I just wanted to illustrate a little bit what the State Secretary was saying about science and innovation. You know, if there's something that really makes sense in terms of Europe, is to have a common science and innovation policy. And because science is about sharing, you cannot really create anything new without sharing it with others. And, you know, if not, you would have in Europe duplication. You would have national agendas that would do exactly the same. And you would not create something that is different and new for people. You know, I think
topics that invest in the new economy, in knowledge and innovation, basically in Europe's tomorrow, is much bigger than before. But I think we still have a long way to go because there's also still, and I'm these are your colleagues, so for Carlos it's more difficult to say probably than for me. But we need to go ahead investing in the new Europe. And
now we're talking about investing and money, and the Horizon 2020 program is the program that is allocating funding to certain fields of research. But is it only funding of research, or are there other factors in between the Horizon 2020 program that stimulate research or innovation?
So the program is divided in 3 pillars. One is fundamental research. Curiosity research is basically my example of the antimatter. Then you have a pillar of the program that is for industries, industrial leadership. And then you have another part of the program which is actually our challenges for the future that cannot be solved by one discipline, that are solved by different disciplines. Like how are you going to solve the health problems like diabetes, like obesity? You know, it's not just doctors. It's not just anthropologists, it's sociologists, it's chemistries. So it's a really a multidisciplinary way of looking at science and innovation. And so we are trying to get closer to the market without really losing our edge, which is the fundamental science that we are in Europe the best in the world. And so we have to keep that edge in terms of competitive advantage. But then we have to explain in Europe how important this money is for our everyday life. I mean, when the Nobel Prize for graphene came up, this is a man that discovered that one layer of carbon is actually a fantastic material. I mean, that group of people were financed by the European Research Council. Yeah. Because they were here, they were not somewhere else, they were in Europe.
In this project, Horizon 2020, 86 billion euros is invested, am I right? Yeah. So is there maybe some research to make it a bit more concrete for the audience? Some research that one of you would like to mention that you're personally very excited about, that you say, well, that
Maybe
that is
a Dutch research,
Well,
Mr.
yeah.
Dekker?
I was in Dwingelo a couple of weeks ago, and Dwingelo does not have a university, but it has a renowned institute on astrology. And what is interesting is that it also is the office where a collaboration of, I think, 80 universities out of 13 countries come together, where basically telescopes are interconnected. And if you interconnect telescopes, you get a very huge telescope. All these telescopes combined make up for a telescope with a diameter of 10,000 kilometers. Impossible to build, but that's when you start collaborating and linking telescopes from different sites who view at the look at the sky and basically combine the information that comes out of it.
And this is a
And it-
project funded by
It's a
Horizon.
project funded by Europe, and it's a project with players from all European countries, and it also shows that Europe is not basically ending by the 28 member states, but we work together with other countries in the world as well. So Europe is the initiator of these events, but in essence, it's open to collaboration from all parties,
Yeah.
as long as they bring in knowledge and bringing the expertise that helps the project to become better.
Because this Horizon 2020 program subsidizes on one hand entrepreneurs, businesses, small-scale businesses, and on the other hand universities, right? So I was wondering, what happens if you subsidize a business, and for instance, this business to innovate and to continue doing their research, and this business goes bankrupt? What is it? It probably happens.
Then it
what
ends.
happens with the research?
Well, the research is probably open. It's still being published. The data is probably open. It can be reused. But of course, the company then ends.
Yeah.
Well, this morning in the Financieel Dagblad, our own Financial Times actually in Holland, there was stated that 2.7 billion from the Horizon 2020
Yep.
program is pulled out of the program to act as a guarantee for those companies who make losses. Am I correct?
Not really. Not really. No, but it's a very good question, and it's I'm thankful that you asked that. What we are doing is that we have a new and very important instrument in Europe called the European Fund for Strategic Investment. It's a 300 billion euro fund that wants to be the key driver to go from an economy that was based on rents to a knowledge economy. And so that instrument will be able to do more in terms of the knowledge economy, science, innovation. And the Horizon 2020 is contributing to that instrument, actually to go into the sense that I was saying, that at the end of the day, the amount of money that we will put in terms of science innovation will be bigger than the 80 billion. And so that's really the objective. The objective is to be able to get more out of what we have, because we are in times of scarce resources. So if we can get that money to do more, then we are in good shape.
Okay. Well, thank you. So the 2.7 billion eventually leads to more research, if am I correct?
I hope so.
I
hope so.
think we
I
have a
really
question
hope
from
so.
the audience, already waiting for a long time. Excuse
Yeah,
me.
I have a question for Mr. Dekker. You investigated new ways for education for children, and I'm curious to what the ideas are, like out-of-the-box ideas, maybe which includes technology.
You're probably referring to the discussion of Education 2032.
I don't know the name exactly,
Well,
but
you have to put a label and a name on it. But I find it really inspiring and also necessary to think about what is Europe and what's the Netherlands going to look like in 15 years' time, when basically the kids that enter school right now are then leaving school or leaving university and applying for a job or starting their own company. Because if we look ahead, we should think about are the courses and is the knowledge that we teach our children and the skills, is that still relevant in 15 years? And we haven't done that in the Netherlands for a long, long time. We only changed our curriculum in schools whenever there was sort of an incident. For instance, if there was something with, well, for instance, the recent incidents in Paris, then we tell schools you have to do more about human rights, about anti-discrimination, and that's all valid, but it's very ad hoc. And I want more strategic thinking about what we teach our children.
Thank you for your question.
Do you have a specific idea about it, how you're going to change it?
Well, let me tell you of some of the topics that come up, because we haven't ended the conversation and discussion yet, and there's a special commission looking into that and coming up with a result and an advice later on this year. But maybe they're just to pick up the light a little bit. There are two things. There's a huge discussion going on to what extent should we teach our children to actually code. We learn different languages at school, French, English, German. We even teach sort of dead languages like Greek, Latin. But the language that is used today to make sure that our computers work is not taught at school. So one of the issues on the table is, should that not be in our school curriculum? And I think that's a very, very valid question. The other thing that's on the table is that, and it's very specific for the Netherlands, there is a clear-cut separation between schools that focus on knowledge and schools that focus on skills. If you want to go to university, you go to the VWO, it's a knowledge-driven program. If you want to go to vocational training, MBO, your school is much more focused on practice. And one of the issues that is on the table is, shouldn't we get rid of that very rigid separation of skills and knowledge and combine the two much more? Knowledge is also very important for people who are going to work in more practical firms, in vocational training, as are skills for students who want to go to universities. So learning by doing, learning by design, getting to know how you apply the knowledge in practice is certainly one of the topics that's going to be prominent in what's going to happen next later on this year in the advice.
Thank you for your question. Just quickly to come back to this Horizon 2020 program and to focus on the University of Amsterdam, where we are now. We read that the University of Amsterdam receives 90 million euros from the Horizon 2020 project. Is that a lot compared to other universities, Mr. Dekker?
I wouldn't dare to say. But more in general, the Netherlands is doing really great. Yeah. Research and innovation is the only program in Brussels where we get more money out than we actually put in. Right. It pays off hugely. For every euro we put in as the Netherlands, we get three out?
I think you put around 1 and you get 3 billion. I mean, it's if you do
I thought we put €1 in, we get €1.5 out. But still, that is an interest rate that probably everyone would bring his money for to the bank at the moment. And that's a huge compliment to the research community, because what I like so much about Horizon 2020 is that it is merit-based. It's highly competitive. You only get money if you belong to the best. And I think that should be the criteria, not equal distribution among member states. Only the best are going to put us forward. Only the best are going to make sure that we get actually progress. Yep. So it shows that Dutch universities are doing good. Probably the University of Amsterdam is doing very good as well.
I'm glad we're getting a very large amount of the grants provided by Horizon 2020, but I was on the most influential research actually seems to take place in the United States. They have Stanford and Harvard. Why don't we have one here in Europe or Yale or universities like that?
No, but I mean, really, I think that we should always look at other places and not be complacent. But just to give you 16% of the articles, the papers that you write in this country are in the top 10 of the world citations. This is amazing. I mean, you're comparing yourself to huge countries, and you are a 16 million people country that 16%, 1/6 of what you write, your scientists write, is on the top 10 of the world. That's an amazing thing. It's really, I think that if you look, and I know that the University of Amsterdam, by the way, is in the top 10 of the universities and research centers here that receive the most, and that's because you have very good people here. And as Sander was saying, this is about excellence, about merit, about the best getting it. And so you can always compare yourselves to others, which is good, but sometimes it's also in life very important to celebrate the fact that we are doing a good job. Because just if you celebrate is the only way that allows you to give self-confidence for when you fail, don't feel that you cannot do it again. And a moment ago we were talking about companies and what happens to the companies if they go bankrupt. Yeah. I mean, one of the good things in life, actually for me, innovation is about the succession of failures. It's about failing, and one day you get something. So we should see those failures of companies or groups or projects as part of the process of innovation and science. So yeah. I would look at it in a positive way.
Because as you mentioned, and Mr. Dekker as well, that it is very, very competitive in order to receive these funds. According to our statistics, only 1 out of 7 proposals by researchers is awarded a fund from the Horizon 2020 program. Are the criteria that difficult, or is there just a lack? Like, would it even be better to get even more money for researchers?
There's 2 things. One is that the program increased, and that's a good sign. Europe had the vision to increase the amount of the Horizon 2020 compared to the other program. So it went from 60 billion to 80 billion. But still, it's probably small for the great things we have in Europe. So it's a little bit by being a victim of your own success. Yep. So you are a good program, people want to be part of it, and so really the success rate comes down. But it's just basically probably the message that we should keep giving to governments around Europe is that for the next program we should have more. And that should be a good way, because it's a good way for European taxpayers, because you are investing in your future. And the fact that you discover something new here in the Netherlands is going to be good for everybody in Europe.
All right, so according to you, after 2020, we should have even more than 86 billion euros in the...
Absolutely, I mean, we should always aim for more, because we know that it's a good investment for the future. I think it's the best investment we can make. So, of course, we have to live with our reality that we are all in Europe in a difficult time. We have to be realistic about it, but we have to aim for more, because political life and politicians, it's the art of making the right choices. And in between the scarce resources we have, I think that science and innovation is a good choice for the citizens. It's a good way to use the taxpayers' money, because you can get results out of it.
Right, that's clear. I think we have another question from the audience.
So there are 86 billion euros is invested in different kind of companies, and some of them go bankrupt. But my question is, why paying with this with public funds? Why not leave it to the market and they can decide, okay, we're going to invest in this company or that company, and they decide, okay, I think this company is not going bankrupt and the other one is maybe is. So why wasting? No, not wasting, but why investing public funds into this?
You know, I'm a liberal at heart, and I understand your question, but if there's an area where it makes sense to have public funding is in research and science. Because there's areas where private funding will never get there.
Why not?
You know, because such areas of fundamental science would be very difficult for actually the market and the private companies to go on there. And I'll give you a good example that you will remember. And in 1990, 92, 1993, there was in Texas, basically the construction of a large Hadron Collider, a particle accelerator, that was in 1993 stopped because there was no more public money. But at the same time, there was the construction in Europe of the Large Hadron Collider in CERN. That, actually, the result of that is that with the Large Hadron Collider, we discovered the Higgs boson. That will change for generations and generations of people the results of such a discovery. That could have happened in the United States, but it didn't. Why? Because there was a market failure. And that market failure has to be filled with public money. And so the objective of Europe is not just about public money. It's basically 2/3, 1/3. When you look at the objective, the 3% investment in innovation and science, you're talking about 1/3 public, 2/3 private. So you are talking about private investment too, and it's very important. But there's areas where the public investment is very, very important.
Okay, so you make the comparison with the United States. But still, in the United States, you have Silicon Valley with a lot of companies, and that's all paid by private funds. So why don't we have that here in Europe?
I mean, we have niches of great places in Europe with great companies. I mean, you are starting here Startup Delta, which is a very good initiative. But we cannot mix up the two things. One is giving the conditions for companies to thrive, for companies to invest, give them the right laws for having lower barriers for them to invest in research and innovation. The other is to give the conditions to actually create new things that are so fundamental that no company or no shareholder would invest. And you know how the transistor was created in the United States. Is one at some point, the Bell Labs decided that as a private company, they wanted to actually do fundamental science. And they were able actually to get to the result of finding such a unique thing for the digital economy called the transistor. So you have sometimes private companies also doing fundamental research, but still you need public money for fundamental research, because if not, you will never get there. And so we have to have a balance in between the two, and knowing that really to get closer to the market, you need more Silicon Valleys. Absolutely right. But for having more Silicon Valleys, you have to create the conditions for that to happen. You cannot impose that.
Okay, well, thank you for your question. I hope after the Horizon 2020 program, we have succeeded in creating those conditions. I have another question about the allocation of the funding, actually. Maybe you know more about that, Mr. Dekker, because to us it seemed that a lot of the funding goes to the hard sciences, like physics, chemistry, that's kind of stuff. We were wondering, aren't there any funding going to humanities or social sciences?
There's also funding going to humanities. Last month...
Is it a 50-50 balance?
I'm not sure if it's going to be 50-50, but if you look, for instance, in the Netherlands, if you look at the direct funding for universities, and you compare that with the countries around us, of the direct funding, there's a larger amount that goes into, for instance, the humanities and the social sciences, and sometimes that the funding that is divided up for is sort of in a competition goes more into technology. But I don't think that it's fair to say that in the Netherlands the more exact sciences are in a preferable position. But what I like about Horizon 2020 is that it does not only invest in technical innovation, it also invests in social innovation. And it also invests in the humanities. For instance, last month I was in Berlin with Robert Jan Smits, and Robert Jan Smits is one of our high civil servants in Brussels, the right hand of Carlos. And we could give the start of a project that is run by the NIAD, which is affiliated also to the University of Amsterdam, to basically combine all the databases that deal with the Holocaust, and so bring the history of that black page of Europe together. And it's important for the survivors to find out about the last days of their families. It's important for teachers to open up these archives that have been closed for a very long time. And I think it's a fantastic project that helps the humanities get a step further and work towards what we call open science, but not in technology based. This is purely the humanities.
All right. So beside this, so you have humanities, social science, sciences. Is this Horizon 2020 project, and then we go on to the next topic. Is it also meant to stimulate the political cooperation in between countries as well, rather than just sending money to different states? So this whole political cooperation and the idea of Europe, is that
absolutely
included in the?
It's really an open program, so it's actually open also outside of Europe to the best people in the world. And so it's a program, really a collaboration and getting people together into the same aim. So one of the things that we are building in Europe is called the European Research Area, that is just about that, to basically align the agendas of the different countries in terms of research, to basically get or avoid duplications sometimes that we have in Europe. And so that's the ultimate game. I mean, that's really the aim of the program. But I mean, as Sander was saying, it's a very diversified program, and it's really going from a paradigm where people would look at discipline by discipline to look at research in a multidisciplinary way. I mean, I think that's really the key for the future. And so humanities and social sciences, they are embedded all over. I mean, whatever project you do, you need social sciences. And so they are in the program embedded in all these areas, from health to energy to food to water. Social sciences are there.
Right. So it's mixed all together, and as well the more scientific decisions are made lately on a more European level rather than on the state level, right?
The decisions are not made by politicians. The decisions are made by really specialists, academics and professors, and so these projects go through a panel. They are reviewed by these people. And so politicians have no way of getting it wrong, right? Because you're doing by
you do not
the
have
right
any
people.
influence on the
we
decision.
don't have absolutely zero.
So there's
zero
no
influence.
personal
Absolutely.
influence.
I mean, the only thing is that the program was designed with these 3 pillars, with this idea, this political vision, that you would have to go from fundamental from the lab to the market. So that was let's say, the vision of the politicians. Then there's no political choice, and I think that's a great thing. I mean, that's really one of the successes of the program, is that there's no political decision.
Yes, and in addition to that, because you were asking, like, why is this on the European level, and why is international collaboration so important? I think that there are many political and policy topics that do not belong in Brussels. You should also always look at what level can you organize things in the most effective way. And sometimes that's the level of the city. The city of Amsterdam can basically do everything with city planning and making sure that it attracts companies to the city and so on. Sometimes it's the national level or the regional level. But I think that if you look at research and science, in its DNA, that is so global. Researchers do not stick to their countries, they do not stick to their universities. They go everywhere where their best peers are, where they find the best infrastructure, the best laboratories, the best colliders, the best magnets. So in order to be powerful in the competition with other big players on the global market, we should really unify on this topic.
And they do it. I think, I do a lot in my work, a lot of science and diplomacy. And I was a couple of days ago in the Kingdom of Jordan, in Amman, to actually go and to a project that is financed by the EU. called Sesam. It's the only particle accelerator in the Middle East.
Another particle accelerator.
Another particle accelerator, but this one in the Middle East. And you sit around the table in Amman, people from Israel, people from Palestine, people from Pakistan, people from Lebanon, from Libya, you name it, all around the table. And they don't discuss politics, they're discussing science. And that's one of the most powerful instruments we have to create bridges in between countries that otherwise would not be talking to each other. And so the scientists have been global for a long time. And science is such a common language that you see people really binding together. So there's a role here of us as Europeans of creating these bridges along the way that is extremely important. I was in Ukraine signing for Ukrainian scientists, the best of the best, to be able to participate in our program. That is not just that we are making them a favor, we are also making a favor to ourselves, because what they can bring to the table is good for us. And so really it's something that alone you cannot do. And you cannot do today as an individual, as a country, as a group. You cannot
We have
do
to
science
cooperate
alone.
within Europe to increase, improve science as a whole.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there's no very good. No, I'm
There's
sorry, you
no
want to ask a
politi
question?
political separation. Okay, I see we have a question from the audience.
Yes, I have a question about the open sciences. You are both very much in favor of having an open science because it's global in its nature, and I totally agree with you, but this is only one side of the coin. If it would be so great to have open science, it would already be there. So I would like to hear from you, what is the other side of the coin, and what are the battles you are still fighting to make, to actually make open science a realization?
It starts with a common goal. We need everyone to commit to open science and to realize that that's the way ahead. And we still haven't got there. I see young generations of scientists and researchers who see it as a true part of their own nature and their own work, but there are also still scientists who don't see the problem. And that's because when you work at the university, you have open access to everything. And you work within a system that you've been used to for a very long time. But there's a movement going ahead, and I'm very optimistic that more and more people in the research community and outside are saying we need to go and stick to open science and open access. Second, if we all agree that this is the way to go, there's still a lot of hurdles that we have to overcome. The big publishing houses have to come up with new business models. Some do. For instance, Springer, the second largest academic publisher, has recently signed an agreement with all Dutch universities that they are going to publish open access. That's a huge breakthrough. But there are also big big academic publishers who haven't made that step. Second, there are sometimes hurdles about how to deal with open access in public-private partnerships. Because when we fund these innovative projects, there's sometimes also private money going into this. And sometimes private businesses say, I don't want my data or I don't want my work to be out in the open. We have to come up with solutions for that. So there are a lot of practical hurdles we have to take, but it starts with a common agreement.
But shouldn't like Horizon 2020 then focus more on tackling these hurdles or investing more in changing these like business models from publishers?
That's the case. I mean, if you are part of Horizon 2020, you have to agree with open access.
Otherwise, you don't get access to the funding.
It's part of the deal, right? I mean, we have to keep up to our ambitions and what we think it's right for the world and it's right for science. And so, open access, which is basically, I don't know, some of you around probably. I mean, think about what is this open access. Open access is going from something that before that each time you would read an article or a paper, you would have to pay. So it was a model that you would have to pay to read, to a model that is free to read. And we want it to be free to read because we understand that we will have better science if all of you can access that information. But that implies that you have to change the business plan and the business model of these companies that used to get money from subscriptions now to a world where they will also get money, but not from subscriptions, because we think that people should be free to read. And so we have to actually really help them and help us to find a new business model where they have revenues because they're businesses. I mean, we're not saying that it's free. It's actually paid for, but it's not paid by the same people. It's not paid to read. It's free to read. And I think that's very important for your generation. First, because a lot of you on the back are thinking, what is he talking about? Of course, it's free to read, right?
Yep.
This is the way you think, but no, it's not. And then you go, as Sandra was saying, go out to the university, and finally you have to be actually trying to figure out how you can actually get access to
I was trying to find one of my older articles recently, so I went out on the internet,
and you couldn't.
and I couldn't enter my own articles anymore.
Yeah.
So I had to pay $20 or $30 to actually
You
read
actually
my own
did
work.
as well.
I still had it on my computer, of course.
All right, all right.
But
Yeah.
this is sort of the situation that you end up in when you leave your university. The university is a paradise, truly. I mean, enjoy the time being here, get as much out of it, and that goes for students as well as for researchers. But your university pays a lot of money. In total, in the Netherlands, I think 40 or 50 million, if you combine all the money that the universities actually pay these publishers, to make it freely accessible for you. But then it's still not freely accessible to the outside world, not for teachers, not for doctors, not for entrepreneurs. And if we want to win the competition and win the war on who's going to be the most innovative, the most entrepreneurial, and so on, we should make sure that there are no restrictions in sharing knowledge and information.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to address one more very short topic, since we're almost at the end of the interview, which is about the current debate. You have probably heard about it at the University of Amsterdam, which talked a lot about the democratization of the university, but as well, a part of it was the complaint of researchers who said that their research was mainly based on quantitative research, so the amount of papers they have to publish, rather than that they can focus on quality. Mr. Moedas, very briefly, how do you look at those problems? I know that it's not only the University of Amsterdam, but also more universities around Europe. Is it a problem that the EU can do something about?
First of all, I think that let me just probably give you a little story to help us here getting things into perspective. One really very important point is that we have to have the open mind to understand that the world has changed, and that you cannot actually get research by being in your own world. And there's a book that I will urge you to read. It's a very interesting book by a guy called Walter Isaacson. It's called The Innovators. And The Innovators basically looks at the profile of different innovators along and across history. And he gets to 3 basic conclusions about innovation. The first one is that most of the innovation is collaborative, that everything you do is because you collaborate. The second point is that today, most of the innovation actually comes sometimes from the user. In a digital world, is not the producer actually creating that innovation, is the user, is the students, is the universities getting that information back. And the third part is that most of the innovation comes from a very interesting intersection in between science and arts. And this is to the point that really you cannot look at a university and think in between silos, that you have the business school and you have the humanities and you have to publish. No, it's how you get all these people together to produce innovation. And one of the most interesting stories about this third part of science and arts that I found fascinating is basically looking back in history and looking in the first woman that was a programmer. The first programmer in the world was a woman called Ada Lovelace. And Ada Lovelace was the daughter of Lord Byron. Lord Byron was a great English poet. And the mother always said to her, you have to study math and science because your father is a poet and doesn't work, he's not paying the bills, he's got divorced, and so you stud math. And when she actually, for the first time, did the first program, which was basically a sequence of numbers called Bernoulli, the Bernoulli numbers, she was the first in 1830 to look at her, the colleague called Charles Babbage, a man, and said to him, look, Charles, this is much more than numbers. We can do music by programming. And so she was basically giving us what is the core definition of the digital economy, is that everything can be digital. And she was in the 1830. And she was a visionary. And so it was really the moment in history where you changed to a world of digital started in 1830. So, you know, when you are at university, you want to change things, and it's normal that universities and people in university and students want that change to happen. And so I fully understand. I come from a university where we were actually, we had strikes, we had fights, and those fights are totally normal, but they are part of the ecosystem, and they are part of the future of getting us together to get something new. So my point here is that, of course, in Europe, we are trying to get into an approach that is more multidisciplinary. And this is not about if you publish or the quantity. It's about the results and the outputs. So I totally agree that people should think about it and should think about the ways that they are changing the world is not by the number of papers they publish. It's about the impact. And so it's just this message that I would like to leave as a message for the students, for the researchers, that really let's focus on the really important and big things that we ever had, which is to get us all together in a world that was physical and now it's digital. And so how we get to the next step. And getting to the next step will be a journey with pain, because it's not out of pain. We are in a period of scarce resources, so we have to get the best way out of our world and the best way out of our countries. And I know, and I've been really looking at what you've been doing here, and I think that really your country is in the right path to the future. So, of course, there will be problems, of course, there will be fights, but take it as a positive and not as a negative for the future.
Right.
But probably on more the point of, I'll let that to
well, unfortunately, I have to
you
stop
don't
you
have time?
because
No, I'm
you
sorry.
don't have time. It is,
okay.
it is very close.
So
Maybe your last
well,
words?
maybe just short. Publishing for researchers is and will always be very important. But I do agree that we have narrowed our focus maybe a little bit too much on publishing alone. Because I think for someone who works at the university, teaching is as important. Working along with businesses and companies and organization in your area is very important. So if we are going to evaluate universities or researchers, we should not only reward the number of articles, but also the amount of time and what they do to actually share their knowledge with parties outside.
All right, that's clear. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, it's already the end of the interview. The hour went very quickly. Tomorrow we have a new session at Room for Discussion about the financiation of the Islamic State with 3 very interesting guests. For now, I would like to thank you, Mr. Moedas and Mr. Dekker, for this great interview, and please give them a warm applause.